Now welcome to another lightning response video, though before we get to the question, I have to take a moment to celebrate the life of a legend, to celebrate the life of James Earl Jones, who passed away yesterday at the age of 93. And though for many of us he was essentially the voice of our childhood as Darth Vader in the original trilogy, or perhaps Mufasa in The Lion King, he was, of course, in many great films over the years, everything from Conan the Barbarian to Coming to America, to Field of Dreams, and many more. He was truly a great actor, but beyond that, he was a great man, and he will never be forgotten. Alright, and now on to the question, and forgive me if my voice is a little scratchy or if this isn't my best video ever. My wife gave me COVID, and it hasn't affected me too much. My throat is a little sore, my head hurts, and I have some aches and pains, but I'm already getting better after being pretty rough yesterday. Anyway, the question comes to us from the animation connoisseur who asked, "Hey Thor, I have a little conundrum here I hope you might be able to solve. At times, I've found it hard not to feel down with seeing what Disney has done not just to Star Wars, but to Pixar, Marvel, and even themselves, making me wish more than ever we could just return to a time when storytelling was truly king and none of the culture war related stuff was a factor. Problem is, it feels like any form of criticism thrown at modern projects which appeal to those parts of said culture are only looked at as surface level attacks and nothing more. While I didn't watch the Into the Pandaverse South Park special, given that it's a show I never watch, it interested me how in your videos covering it, you talked about how it shows that there's a seemingly never-ending cycle where when people complain about certain projects being woke or whatever, they're perceived by the companies behind them as ists and phobes, causing said companies to double down on them to stick it to them, thus causing them to lose more money and even more fans in the process. So my question to you is, how do we end this cycle? Do we just vote with our wallets and hope that's enough? Or is there another way we can properly get their attention? And while I think the recent cancelization of The Acolyte is proof that voting with your wallet or voting by not viewing something and not subscribing to Disney Plus gets the message across loud and clear. And I know many out there think that Disney is all about the message or the agenda or whatever you'd like to call it, that they'll even burn money for it. And I'm not saying they don't care about it at all. Certainly they do. Certainly they have pushed certain ideas. But money is clearly still king, especially when you factor in that they had to know canceling or not renewing The Acolyte for a second season, that show of all shows, since it's arguably the most diverse, I guess you could call it, with the showrunner Leslie Headland even talking about how it was the most queer thing Star Wars ever. Well, they had to know that not renewing it was going to get quite the backlash or angry reaction from some. It was going to get people saying, and even plenty in the media saying, that Disney was setting a dangerous precedent, that they were catering or pandering to the worst parts of the fandom, to all the ists and phobes who don't watch something unless it's primarily comprised of white, straight male characters or whatever. However, it seems like spending another $180 million, or whatever it might end up being, on a second season wasn't worth it for them. It wasn't worth avoiding that backlash and continuing to push the message, or again, however you want to look at it. I think we can argue how much or how little some things do or do not push a message, certainly. Instead, Disney simply made a business decision and ignored all the other BS, as companies should do. They should look at what their customers actually want and are willing to pay for and to try and give it to them. That is business 101. That is how you keep your customers happy and how you ultimately make money. And though some don't like to hear it or don't want to believe it or whatever, but the customers, the Star Wars fan base, by and large, they didn't want The Acolyte. They didn't like the show and thus they didn't watch it. As I've shown before, the finale doesn't even get close to the numbers of any other previous Disney Plus Star Wars show in terms of number of views in its final week, and is a far, far cry from, say, the numbers pulled in by The Mandalorian Season 2. And I would ask anyone who thinks that it was, again, just the ists and phobes who didn't watch The Acolyte, if they think that explains the huge disparity between, again, how The Mandalorian did and how The Acolyte did. or the disparity in viewership of any of the shows, really. Is that huge drop off in the numbers only the bad people not watching? Are there that many of them? Do you believe that? Or was it something else? Is there some other reason why so many didn't watch The Acolyte? So yeah, I do think voting with your wallet works. I don't know that anything else really will. I think money talks, as the saying goes. I do think Disney is going to listen to that money first and foremost. And again, The Acolyte not getting a second season is pretty strong evidence of that. As for how do we break the cycle, and I'll talk about the one we see in the Star Wars fandom a bit, because as many of you know, there's quite a bit of drama going on right now in it. Well, I would say that people need to start listening to each other and trying to understand what the other side is actually saying, instead of always just jumping to the worst possible conclusions and labeling each other the worst things they can think of. Because I think if they did that, if they actually listened and maybe even, talked to each other, they'd find there's more common ground there than they realize. I think all Star Wars fans, of course, want Star Wars to be good. We all love the same thing. We just don't all agree on what qualifies as good Star Wars or what Star Wars should even be. And that is, as I've pointed out many times before, because Star Wars has been around for nearly 50 years at this point. It's something that many fans have loved for literally decades, while others have only recently discovered it and have been a fan for maybe less than a year even. Hence, with people jumping on at all different points and being fans for different lengths of time and for different reasons, well, of course, opinions or beliefs on Star Wars are going to be pretty extremely varied. And if you are someone who has loved it since seeing A New Hope in the theater in May of 1977, your feelings towards it on what it should be are likely going to be quite strong. And you're also going to feel like, yeah, perhaps they carry a bit more weight than someone who just started watching it with The Acolyte and suddenly has a bunch of opinions on what it should be or become. It's kind of like being at the same job for 40 years and then someone comes in and thinks they can do it better than you on their first day. Of course you're going to take exception to that. Of course you're going to feel like you are being insulted, that they don't know what the hell they're talking about, and you're going to get a bit angry. And if you are that newbie, yeah, you should probably respect the fact that they just might know a bit more or a whole lot more than you do. Now, I'm not necessarily saying I condone gatekeeping, but if you want to be accepted into a community that is well established, maybe don't come in and make huge waves and act like you own the place and immediately deserve respect. Maybe you should first try to respect the ones who have been there a whole lot longer than you. Maybe try to understand their point of view, even if you don't end up agreeing with it. Which is the thing, we don't always have to agree. Hell, we're never always going to agree. But sometimes you just have to suck it up and agree to disagree without having to go to war with each other. Though the current war in the Star Wars fandom, as far as I can tell, I've only kind of observed it from afar and seen people going back and forth about it on X, fighting or defending both sides. But the current war is over hate speech, essentially. It's about trying to silence people who say things you don't like in a too aggressive way, or saying things about other people that you think goes way too far and that they shouldn't be allowed to say about them. And though I certainly think that, yes, sometimes people say things that do go way too far or just aren't necessary to make your point, I'm personally not a big fan of pretty much ever trying to silence people because it's rarely, if ever, going to end well. Trying to silence someone or deplatform them is not going to change their mind or make them see your point of view, not even remotely close. In fact, most people, when you try and silence them, are only going to try and speak even louder. You're only going to reinforce their beliefs that you don't like, and there's a good chance, you're going to push them to even more extreme takes or opinions and beliefs as they go on the defensive and want to perhaps spite those who are trying to silence them. I fully believe that many who hate the other side in Star Wars and beyond these days, they oftentimes take positions or stances on things just to oppose the other side, and that if they stopped for a moment to really think about it rationally and logically, they'd likely see they've found themselves believing or fighting for things they once never would have. They've come to stand for something simply because the other side stands for the opposite, that two sides are basically radicalizing each other and making an even greater enemy for themselves to fight against, which makes them, both sides, feel even more righteous. They feel like they are fighting literal evil and that what they're doing must be done. As I've said before, though about good storytelling, but I think it applies here, it's hard to be a great hero if you don't actually have a great villain, or an evil one, to defeat. It's hard to get a big win when no one's actually fighting against you. And so that's what they do. They just villainize the other side at every turn and make their cause seem all the more noble, instead of, again, ever trying to open a line of dialogue with them, trying to have a conversation with them, and asking them, what do they really believe in? Do you really believe all these things that you get accused of? Again, things like being an ist or a phobe. Do you just want Star Wars to be all white men all the time? And I'm pretty sure if you asked them, the answer to that would be a resounding no. They just feel like an over-focus on diversity and pushing a message or an agenda has hurt the product they love because it detracts from the story that they care the most about. Though, yeah, at the same time, they could maybe lighten up a little bit, because like I said before, sometimes they go a bit too far with their criticism or with the name calling, and that is not going to solve the problem or make anyone want to listen to them either and try to see and understand their points of view. That is going to make someone more easily jump to the conclusions that you are, again, what they say they are. And like I've been saying all along here, until both sides learn to chill and try and understand what the other side is even saying, things are only going to get worse. Well, that's all I got for you this time. Now it's your turn to take to the comments below and tell me what you think about all this. Tell me how you think this ever gets better. Or you can always ask a question for a future lightning response video. All you got to do is start your comment off with "Hey Thor" and then ask away. But whatever you choose to do, leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.